Hello and welcome to another one of Miscellaneous Vlogs. Today, we're taking a look at the Articles of Confederation. Technically the first constitution we had here in America. And so we're going to kind of go over really the importance of it, as it is important in our history, really for showing what we needed to fix going into definitely the more refined document, the U.S. Constitution. So first, I do want to kind of talk about what the Articles of Confederation was. It is a document and technically the first system of government designed by our founding fathers here in the United States. It was considered a confederation. Now, under a confederation, you have very different from what we have today when it comes to government power. You're going to have states having a huge amount of power, and the actual federal government having a little bit of power. So it's actually reversed from what we have today, where the federal government definitely has more power than the individual states. Now, throughout this and for the rest of the curriculum, really, whenever you hear national, central, or federal government, those are all the same thing, okay? That's all the same thing. So, in reality, we see that the states have the most power, that the federal government has the least amount of power, only granted a few. But we're going to see that's going to bring up really a lot of issues here in what we call the United States of America, as they weren't really united at all. So today we're going to talk about the strengths and the weaknesses. Strengths and the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. But first, what I want you to keep in mind, kind of our essential question for today, is why did the Founding Fathers choose a Confederation plan of government? We're going to be answering this towards the end here. And then, of course, why did the Founding Fathers believe that the Articles needed to be changed? And then, eventually, not even just be changed, as that's what they originally wanted to do, but thrown out altogether and replaced with what we have today, the U.S. Constitution. So keep those in the back of your mind while we go through this, okay? Now, something I need to bring up is the two major achievements that the Articles of Confederation had. First is that it brought the Revolutionary War to a successful conclusion. Again, we had to go ahead and create a government from scratch, and the fact of the matter is we'd never done that before. So this was a great way for us to create a government and some type of law for the land. And second is something called the Northwest Ordinance. This actually helps plan basically governing the western lands, new land that we could now get into. If you remember, we talked about the Proclamation Line of 1763, and the colonists couldn't go past that. Well, now we're not colonists anymore, so we can go past that. We don't have to follow that anymore. But there needs to be some law out there and some organization. That's what the Northwest Ordinance does. So let's go right on through the list. First, Congress, which is part of that federal government, was given the power to go ahead and declare war, a power it still has today, as well as establish an army and a navy. That would be definitely a strength. That's an advantage. The problem is that they were not able to draft soldiers. So because they couldn't draft soldiers, I mean, what's an army without soldiers, right? So of course, we do see that this kind of negates the fact that they, of course, have the power to establish an army and navy. So that kind of clears itself out, clears it out. The government can go ahead and make and sign peace treaties, which is a good thing. Again, you wouldn't want, for example, that to be a state power, because you wouldn't want the state of, like, Rhode Island to sign a peace treaty with France while Massachusetts is at war with France. That makes no sense. So that's something that you definitely want the federal government to go ahead and handle, where, again, as a country, we sign and make peace treaties. The problem is they have really no power to enforce the treaties. Again, back to the fact that they really didn't have, they couldn't draft soldiers, and so they couldn't get an army if they needed to. It would all be volunteer. So that kind of negates that a bit. The Congress does have the ability to go ahead and borrow money. That's huge. Again, we are in a lot of debt when we start our country because, well, wars aren't cheap. So we are able to borrow money. The problem is, though, the federal government itself has no true power to collect taxes from the states. It's more of a, hey, states, if you have some extra money you want to throw our way to the federal government, we'll take it. But again, how many states do you think really did that? We're going to see that the federal government is going to be just bone dry with money by the time the Articles does need to get a revamp. And it does need to get a revamp. So again, that kind of can't really pay back money you owe if you can't collect money. So that kind of negates that too. Well, they organize a post office. The Congress still had, that's still federal government. The USPS, United States Postal Service, does go ahead and still is controlled by the federal government. So that's a strength. What are some other weaknesses? Well, technically, they didn't have a chief executive. Under the Articles of Confederation, we didn't have a president like we have today. There was no executive branch. Now, there was a president of Congress, but that really wasn't the same type of role as what we have today for the president. There was no national court system. In fact, there was no judiciary branch. Insane to think, but there were, we think about the three branches today. Well, this is only really one branch, and that's Congress. That's legislative. They have no power to regulate interstate commerce, which again is trade between the states. And because of that, there was no national currency as well. So each state had its own currency. So you would go to Massachusetts. You'd have your Massachusetts money. That's where you lived, and then you'd go to New Hampshire. Just go to New Hampshire for for a little bit. You'd have to change your money over to New Hampshire's money. Or if you went to Rhode Island, imagine today going to Rhode Island, you'd have to change your money to Rhode Island money. That's crazy to think about. In fact, these United States were not acting united, as you can tell. And of course, it was very difficult to pass laws. They needed 2/3 of the vote to actually pass a law. But here's where it gets really, I would say, the worst part of this Articles of Confederation. And that's the fact, as crazy as this sounds, you would need a unanimous vote in order to change the Articles. That means everybody would have to go ahead and agree to an amendment in order to get it passed. It's hard enough to get 2 people to agree on something, not to mention 13 different states. And not to mention that if we had that still in effect today, that'd be 50 states. Every state would have to go ahead and agree. And again, there's many things, especially back here in the 1780s, that we have the North and the South disagreeing over. A lot that they disagree over. So of course, we're going to see that this is not going to be the way to do it at all. And so of course, it's quite obvious what happened. We needed to change the Articles, and they do. In fact, they all our forefathers meet together down in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, again, in what we now know as the Constitutional Convention. And when they met in Independence Hall, they all met. They at first were meeting, and everyone knew they were meeting, to go ahead and change the Articles. Now, nobody knew that they had actually thought, these Articles aren't working, we're going to go ahead, crumple them up, throw them away, and we're going to start anew with the U.S. Constitution. So back to our question I asked at the beginning, why did the Founding Fathers choose a Confederation plan of government? Why would they choose that there is not a big federal government with big power, but rather the states have the power and the federal government has little power? Yeah, well, exactly. Again, they had feared that a strong central government would go ahead and create tyranny, just like, again, they just fought a war against with Britain, and would stamp out the people's natural God-given rights. Something that, of course, was, they fought for. And, of course, that became the big issue here. They didn't want to give so much power to the federal government so it would be so powerful as to stamp out people's rights. And so, yes, they thought it was justified to go ahead and, use a Confederation plan of government. But then I ask, why did the Founding Fathers actually really see a need to replace these Articles? Yeah. At the end of the day, the nation needed to function as one cohesive unit, one united country, and not 13 small unorganized nations as it was. And what we're going to see is an event called Shays' Rebellion that's truly going to go ahead and show that there are major problems with the Articles of Confederation that need to be addressed and need to be fixed. So again, here's it all together for you. As you can see, there's a lot more weaknesses than strengths to the Articles of Confederation. It just is a government that wasn't going to work for the United States, especially even thinking of the name, United States. So it is very interesting thing to think that, again, not too far, less than 10 years after it's gone into effect, America's first Constitution is tossed out for the U.S. Constitution that we know today, which is technically number 2 for us. However, that Constitution is written so well, and they did a fantastic job with it, thinking about all sorts of different variables, as you're going to see in our next lesson. All right, guys, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you back in the classroom.